Good morning, everybody. This is Miss Davis, and it's time for Dun Dun Dun, our annual arts assessment. This year, we'll be assessing Standard 2, which is music and art history. Now, it would be ridiculous to try to cover the last 1600 years of art and music history in 30 minutes, but here at Clinton, we see ridiculousness as a challenge, so let's do it. Now, why should you care about this? You should care because you don't want to be humiliated and embarrassed by being ignorant. You don't want to be out in the club someday and someone comes up and says, "Hey, did you hear about the fall of Rome?" And you say, "Rome fell, he be trippin'." And then everyone would laugh at you because you're ignorant. That's bad. For real though, you have to know this because you have to understand how the world works in order to figure out what you want your place in the world to be. And you can't understand the world now if you don't understand what made it that way. History explains why stuff is how it is. Also, we need to assess you. For today, we won't be studying the art of Africa or Asia or even art that originated here in the US. No, today we're going to be thinking about Western civilization. For you hillbillies, that's not country in Western civilization. It's the part of our culture that originated in Europe. So let's start by saying that art and music have been around as long as people have. The oldest known musical instrument and the oldest paintings have been found in caves in Europe, and they're around 40,000 years old. And no, Michaela, I didn't make either one of them. So people, humans, like to organize stuff. We need to organize stuff. You don't keep your cereal in the toilet, right? Organizing helps us understand things. So the history of Western civilization can be organized by sorting it into different time periods. Just like now, people at the same time tended to like about the same stuff. You know, like most people don't go around wearing hoop skirts or stovepipe hats nowadays. We like about the same stuff. So the periods can be organized by what was going on at the time. Our first will be the classical period of ancient Greece and Rome that reached its peak about 2,500 years ago. Notice the beauty and realism of these pictures. These people loved art and music, and everything they did reflected that. Everything except fighting all the time while trying to build massive, powerful empires, that is. So, anyway, Greece was almighty and powerful, and then things started to decline. So, Rome became the place where everything was happening, kind of like LA or New York is to us. Then Rome hit the skids. Too much fighting, too much partying, and trying to hold on to the ginormous Roman Empire. Then in the years 410 and 455, Rome was attacked by the Visigoths and the Vandals, tribes from Germany. Oh, and by the way, it's where we get the word vandalism. Who came in and they just tore everything up. Literally tore up the town. There was epic looting and pillaging going on. The Roman army was defeated, and European civilization went into a tailspin, although they were doing pretty well over in the Arab world. So this sort of closed out the classical period and led to the period of time known as the Middle Ages. After the fall of Rome, most people at the time were so busy just trying to survive that they couldn't focus on making things beautiful or on learning. So about the only people who could read and write were monks and priests. We call this period of time the Middle Ages because it was in between the classical period and the rebirth of knowledge that was coming after. Some people call it the Dark Ages because the lamp of learning had sort of metaphorically gone out, or the metaphorical lamp of learning had gone out. Now, I'm not trying to insult your intelligence, but there was no electricity, no toilets, no deodorant, no way to print books. We take it for granted that our libraries will be full of books that anybody can just go in and check out, and that when you push print on the computer, paper with words on it will just shoot out. But until around 1450, every single book that existed had to be written and copied by hand. Now, you don't even want to read your science textbook. Can you imagine having to write it also? So, because they were so rare, books were very precious things. and many of them were also beautiful works of art. On the music scene, different groups of monks and nuns around Europe had their own music. Their entire church service was sung or chanted to music, but they had no way to share it with each other since it was going to be about 1550 years till the iPod was invented. Then around the year 800, the head of the church, Pope Gregory, sent some monks out all over Europe to collect these different songs and write them down so everybody could sing the same ones. This was the first time music had been written down in a system that everyone could follow. The picture above is an example of what music looked like then. Notice the beautiful artwork that's centered around the letter A. And for those of you who read music, I can't read this either. Here's an example of women singing one of these Gregorian chants. Wow, that is so beautiful. And by the way, regular folks had their own music, but since it wasn't part of the church service, it wasn't written down. And the art, forget about it. Because the people were working so hard on just staying alive and finding food and shelter, they kind of forgot how to make things realistic. Civilization had kind of gone backwards. So many of the pictures we see from that time, well, most actually, lacked depth and perspective. This example is pretty typical of a painting of the time. Notice that the people are about as big as the castle towers next to them, and the artist couldn't figure out how to draw the top of the table to make it have depth, so he made it flat. In real life, those plates would slide right onto the floor. Watch out for falling silverware. Then all heck broke loose around 1450 when this guy named Gutenberg invented the printing press and there was an explosion of learning. This brought a new thirst for knowledge as printed books and music became accessible to regular people. This flowering of culture is known as the Renaissance or rebirth. Artists of the Renaissance looked back to ancient Greece and Rome for inspiration and tried to make their works reflect things as they are, realistically. Paintings began to have perspective again, things in the background actually looked further away, and objects appeared to have three dimensions. The picture up in the top left is a self-portrait of Leonardo da Vinci of Italy. He is known as the Renaissance man because he was interested in so many different things. He was an inventor, a scientist, a botanist, a painter, a sculptor, and he was really good at all of it. Check this. Leonardo could write with both hands moving in opposite directions at the same time. I can barely write with one hand. Pictured below his self-portrait is his most famous painting, the Mona Lisa. Notice the background. It almost looks like she's sitting in front of a window, but unlike painting of the Middle Ages, the background looks distant, far away. That's perspective. By the way, if you're thirsty for knowledge, go drink a book. So here we see two paintings of the same subject, the Madonna and Child. The painting on the left is by Duccio and was painted in 1285 during the Middle Ages. The painting on the right is by Raphael and was painted in 1508 during the Renaissance. Painting sure had changed a lot during those 200 years. So now it's your turn to get involved. Please put your name and grade in the upper right hand corner of your paper using handwriting that can be deciphered by humans. Then compare and contrast the two paintings using full sentences, such as, the women in both paintings have fingernail polish, although one is wearing pink and the other is wearing purple. See, I compared them because they both have fingernail polish, and I contrasted them because it was different colors. That was pretty easy. But that was just an example. I'm pretty sure they're not wearing fingernail polish. Now you come up with at least 3 contrasts and comparisons. Number your paper 1 through 3 and write your ideas in full sentences. Focus on the style of the painting as well as the subject. Teachers, please push pause so your students will have time to examine the paintings. About the same time that Raphael was painting during the Renaissance, the Italian master painter and sculptor Michelangelo was also working. Michelangelo took 4 years, from 1508 to 1512, to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in Rome. This is just one of the many panels of the ceiling, and it depicts God giving life to Adam. Here's a view of the Sistine Chapel from the ground looking up. And by the way, this same Sistine Chapel in Rome will be where the Catholic cardinals will meet soon to elect a new pope to replace the retiring pope. This is another of the panels on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, and this is where 2 vaulted corners of the roof ceiling kind of come together, and all those things that look like marble steps and little statues, that's all just painted. It's a flat surface that's painted. Um, More than 5 million people visit the Sistine Chapel every year to look at these amazing works of art. And they were painted 500 years ago, but still 5 million people a year. Now try and tell me that art isn't important to people. It is. Everybody knows who William Shakespeare is, right? Now, I'm not talking about the guy who played left tackle for the University of Alabama. I'm talking about the William Shakespeare who lived in England during the Renaissance and wrote plays and sonnets. He had stuff to say then that's still relevant today. You guys have all heard Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth, Hamlet. He wrote comedies, tragedies, histories. His plays were very popular then, and they still are now. To me, if something sticks around for 500 years, it must be pretty good. What? During the Renaissance, for the first time, composers began writing down songs that weren't religious. The people of that era loved to dance and party, and their music shows that. Here's an example of some Renaissance music being played on instruments that are antiques that were actually from the 1500s. once again, the winds of change began to blow through European history, and people again wanted to get back to art, music, literature that was more emotional. And boy, did they do it with the Baroque era. The Baroque era lasted from about 1600 to 1750. The word Baroque comes from the Italian word barocca and literally means bizarre. By the way, I made up that accent. We generally take it to mean very ornamented and decorated, and the art and music of the day shows that. There was usually a lot going on in Baroque art, lots of action and drama, and in music there were often a lot of notes and drama as well. Here's some Baroque for you. Look at everything going on in this painting. Wow. Look at all the energy, the drama, the action, the light and shadows. This painting, The Fall of Phaeton, is by Dutch painter Peter Paul Rubens. The story is taken from Greek mythology, and it's about this kid, Phaeton, who decides to borrow the family chariot without asking his dad. His dad, Helios, had the job of making the sun rise and set by pulling it across the sky with his chariot. But Phaeton thought he could do it, and he wanted to try driving. I don't think he even had his learner's permit. Anyway, the horses bolted, and the sun scorched everything around it, and in order to keep the universe from being destroyed, Zeus sent down a lightning bolt and killed Phaeton. So the picture shows the chaos that ensued right before order is restored. Very Baroque. And remember, this could happen to you. Don't borrow the chariot without asking first. Baroque music was all about exploring new forms of music, or the way music is put together. Composers were trying to express the fundamental order of the universe. The music had to follow a certain form, although there were different forms being developed. Johann Sebastian Bach was the major force in Baroque music. Bach wrote rules for composing music that we still follow today. Even in popular music, we still follow the same chord progressions and rules as Bach. In fact, Bach's death in 1750 marked the end of the Baroque period. He must have been one important guy. Oh, and don't forget, he's the dude who had the 21 kids. So now we're going to listen to a piece of music written by Bach that you've probably heard before. This is the Toccata and Fugue in D minor. And Toccata and Fugue describes a form of music, the way it's put together. As you listen, answer the questions you see on the slide. Use complete sentences. For example, on number 4, I think the composer is trying to communicate his fear of kittens stemming from a nasty litter box incident. Now that is just an example. I'm sure Bach loved kittens just like the rest of us do, but I want you to be sure to write in complete sentences. Answer all 3 questions as you listen to the music. Take the time to really listen and try to examine your own responses. Sorry that cut off so abruptly. But see what I mean about all that, all those notes and dramatic playing? Very Baroque. Died in 1750. They decided to just shut down the whole Baroque period and start a new one. Well, it wasn't quite like that, but almost. That is the date used to end the Baroque. But as a reaction to all the twirling and drama of the Baroque, the Classical period came along and looked once again to ancient Greece and Rome for inspiration, and they wanted their works to reflect balance and symmetry. This period is also called the Age of Enlightenment, when people began to look to science and intellect to move civilization along. So during this neoclassical period, this new classical, it was the time here of our own American Revolution. Think about the buildings our government chose to build to represent our new country. Look familiar? Compare this picture of the White House to the Greek temple of Athena above it that was built about 2,000 years earlier. Our founding fathers even looked to ancient Greece and Rome for inspiration for the form of government we have, a democracy. This picture, the Oath of the Horatii, was painted by the French painter Jacques Louis David in 1784. Look at the painting. Did he get inspiration from ancient Rome? Yeah. Look at the soldiers, their clothes. Look at the building. At the time the picture was painted, people wore clothes like George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, not togas. The soldiers in the painting are taking an oath of loyalty to Rome. This work became an inspiration during the French Revolution when the revolutionaries were encouraging people to be loyal to France, not to the king, because they thought the king didn't care about them. This painting is an allegory, which is kind of like an analogy. It appears to be about ancient soldiers, but it was really intended to get the people of France in the late 1700s revved up for a revolution. Sometimes artists and musicians and writers had to be kind of subversive to get the message across. Now remember, people wanted order and balance and symmetry in their art. What is your eye drawn to first when you look at this picture? The swords, right? So we know this is not about puppies and rainbows and unicorns. Now look at how the three soldiers on the left are balanced by the women on the right. Look at how the arches frame the three subjects, the soldiers, their father in the center, and their families on the right. That is balance and symmetry. My favorite classical period composer is Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. It's amazing to me that he only lived for 35 years, and that was over 200 years ago. But every kid at Clinton Middle School knows Mozart's music, whether you think you do or not. Mozart was able to write music that expressed the symmetry and balance and order that people of the time were looking for, but also he expressed profound emotions. Here's an example of his music that you will recognize. About 1800, the winds of change began to push the pendulum of culture back again in the other direction. I just wanted to use a mixed metaphor. And people started to want something more expressive in their culture, and artists of the time responded. This time is called the Romantic period, not because there was a lot of kissing, I'm sure there was just the normal amount, but because they turned away from intellectualism and science and placed more value on emotional experience, including love, yes, but also horror and fear, terror, awe of nature. Many artists and authors were inspired by the Middle Ages during this time. The Romantic period is when a lot of the stories of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table were written. You'll see paintings with knights and ladies a lot, paintings of nature, and also there will be books, paintings, and music that reflect the artist's love and pride in their homeland. This is called nationalism. This painting by the English artist J.M.W. Turner shows the awe-inspiring violence of nature that the Romantics were interested in representing. Can you imagine how afraid you would be if you were in one of those boats? Don't even try to say, oh, I'd just jump overboard and start swimming, because you know you'd be wetting your pants and crying for your mom. Okay, so I said that Romantics were also inspired by the Middle Ages, and here are some paintings with knights and their fair maidens. The paintings were done in the 1800s, but they're looking back to the Middle Ages for inspiration. These were pretty common. Remember, at the time, during the Romantic period, men dressed like Abraham Lincoln or like cowboys. They did not go around wearing suits of armor. Knights are from the Middle Ages. Okay, one of the great Romantic composers was Peter Ilyich Tchaikovsky, and one of his best known works is a great example of romance in music. That doesn't mean it's a slow jam. The music is very loud and exciting and emotional, and it's all about his pride in being Russian. Using a theme of pride in your country is called nationalism, and it was very prevalent during the Romantic period in art, music, and literature. This song is called the 1812 Overture, and it describes Russia's defense of their capital of Moscow against the advancing armies of the French Emperor Napoleon. I wish I had time to tell you about how Napoleon was really defeated because he chose the wrong kind of buttons for his soldiers' uniforms, but I don't. Anyway, Tchaikovsky also name checks the French by including parts of their national anthem played like a funeral march. What? Take that, Frenchies! Let's have a listen. Does it sound like the music represents a battle to you? Now, I don't want to skip over Impressionism. It's a style of art in which the artist tries to convey their impression of a subject rather than literally reproducing it. Photography had been invented by now, and Impressionists felt like if you wanted something literally represented, you could just take a picture of it. It lasts longer. They were more interested in portraying the idea of something. Impressionism was kind of a bridge between the Romantic and modern periods. This piece is Water Lilies by the Impressionist painter Monet. So now we get to the modern period, from about 1900 to about now, although some people are calling now the postmodern period, which means after modern, and I don't even really know what that means. How can it be after now? Ugh. In real life, people in the future will come up with a name for this period of time we're in now. I think it'll be called the Goofy period. Anyway, artists and musicians wanted to rebel against all of the established rules, kind of like you do with your parents. So things got a little far out. The musicians were finally able to record sound, and they also began trying new sounds and new ways of looking at things in art. In modern art, just about anything goes. This is an example of a famous painting by the Spanish artist Picasso titled The Three Musicians. This style is called Cubism. He was trying to break away from perspective and realism, and by golly, I think he's done a great job. Look at all these geometric figures. It's very square or cube looking. There are very few curved lines. It also looks flat and two-dimensional. Sometimes Cubist painters were trying to show what the subject would look like when seen from different viewing angles at the same time, even though we can only really see one view at a time. Don't forget to notice the little doggy in the bottom left-hand corner. It has to be meaningful. Let's talk about modern music. I'm going to skip over the first 50 years of modern classical music because people were writing things just to see if they could, and most of it's crazy. Like the song 4 minutes 33 seconds by John Cage, where the performer comes on stage and sits at the piano for 4 minutes and 33 seconds without playing anything. The music was supposed to be the music part was supposed to be the audience's reaction and their discomfort at the awkward situation, wiggling in their seats, tapping feet, random coughing. And the thing that gets me is that the guy was actually paid to perform it, to sit there for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. I wonder if he had to practice a lot. Okay, so instead, let's look at modern popular music. In the late 1800s, African American spirituals and folk songs, which were influenced by African and Caribbean music, were being used as the basis for blues music, which sort of married classical music and became jazz. In the early 1950s, jazz and blues morphed into early rock and roll, and from there we get pop, dance music, hip hop, and rap. So all of these styles and forms of music are still very much alive, and without the mix of the European classical music with the African inspired music, we wouldn't have the popular music that we have today. In other words, and that concludes our arts assessment for 2013. Thank you very much for your time and your work. Teachers, please collect the papers from your students. Make a note of those who might not have participated. Clip it together, add your name somewhere, and send them to the office. Now, students, go out and create something!